Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with how I like to do my corn on the cob. That's right, I should have shown you this a couple months ago. Well, actually, forget that. I should have shown it about 6 years ago because this is such a great technique and by far the easiest way to do corn on the cob. And if you're thinking, Chef John, I already know how to cook corn on the cob. Even I can do that. Well, I know any fool can cook an ear of corn. No offense. But that's not really what this tip's about. This technique has to do with dealing with this, corn silk, the bane of our corn on the cob eating existence. So whether we're talking about removing this before we cook the corn or after we cook the corn, it's generally kind of an annoying, messy task. But if you use this method, that's not going to be the case. So step one, we're going to cook this ear of corn in the microwave. So I'm going to head over to my microwave cabinet and pop in that ear of corn. And for my microwave, about 3.5 minutes is perfect. Oh, by the way, microwave makers, stop putting so many buttons on these. I mean, inverter, turbo, defrost. What is that? We don't need that, okay? But anyway, we're going to set that for 3.5 minutes, or in my case, 3:33. So I save time not having to move my finger to the 0. But basically 3.5 minutes. And of course, you could just space out and watch that turn. But I always like to be productive, so I decided to work on my only dance move for a couple minutes. Hey, if you're only going to have one move, it's got to be perfect. And by the way, this method will work even if you're not microwaving. So even if you decide to grill that corn in the husk, this is still going to work. And then when the time's up, we're going to remove that ear of corn. Use a towel, of course. It's very hot. And I'm going to bring that over to the cutting board so you can watch the magic. So I'm going to turn the ear this way. I want to grip it on the tapered end. And we're going to take a sharp, possibly serrated knife and cut off the bottom inch of the cob. And the reason we're doing that is because that corn silk runs from the top all the way to that end. And by cutting there, we've now released every one of those little threads. And then all we need to do is grab that towel and kind of squeeze that tapered end, kind of push that hot cob out of the husk. And because we're gripping that tapered end, where all that corn silk comes together, that ear of corn is going to come out of that husk with virtually no corn silk attached. And I say virtually because you might get 1 or 2 rogue pieces, but for all intents and purposes, it really does come out perfect. Although technically, this is not perfect until we get some butter and salt on it. So that will be our final and predictable scene. A little bit of butter, a little bit of salt, and I'm ready to enjoy this cob silk-free. And above and beyond that, it makes this desilking technique super easy. The other nice thing about microwaving an ear of corn in the husk is it stays hot forever. This was like way too hot to eat. This was one of the more painful videos I've done lately. Mostly because I couldn't find those little things you stick in the ends of the corn. I don't even remember what those are called. Corn holders? That doesn't sound right. But anyway, that's it. Just a nice little short techniques video I cobbed together. I was in a little bit of a rush this morning. I have to go see a colonel about a problem he's having with his ears. So there's just no time for any corny jokes or puns. But I really do hope you give this a try. So head over to foodwishes.com for there's no ingredients, but there's always more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Mexican grilled corn. That's right, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. And I'll show you how to make what I consider the greatest corn on the cob recipe of all time. And the only problem with this recipe is it's so fantastically delicious, you're actually going to be angry you did not know about this recipe sooner. It's that good, okay? So step one, and really the only thing you should prep ahead of time, would be our chili mayonnaise mixture. So in a bowl, I have a spoon of mayonnaise, the real stuff. To that, we're going to add a little bit of freshly squeezed lime juice. At that point, we're going to add a big spoon of ancho chili powder and a smaller spoon of smoked paprika. And then we're simply going to take a whisk and mix that together. And by the way, please use fresh spices for this. If you bought your smoked paprika and ancho chili powder before you had a cell phone, you're going to want to throw those away and get some fresh stuff. All right, the flavor of spices, especially things like this, will fade with age, and it won't do this amazing recipe justice. All right, so use the good stuff. Once that's mixed up, you can just refrigerate that until needed. And then the other thing you want to prep ahead would be some melted butter. And of course, you could do it in the microwave. I'm going to do mine in direct sunlight. I think it tastes much better that way. All right, so we're set on the mayo and the butter. Next up, we're going to prep our corn, and all I'm going to do is boil it in salted water for 5 minutes. Now, traditionally, I believe these are grilled in the husks, but I didn't feel like messing with that. Besides, I already shucked the corn at the supermarket. So like I said, I'm going to boil that for 5 minutes in salted water. And by the way, you farmers, can you answer this for me? And you can see as I pull this out here, some of the kernels turned a rusty color. Here, let me turn this one around so you can see what I'm talking about. Why is that? Please, farmers, I need an answer. Since we're going to grill this, I don't think it matters, but I'm just curious. But anyway, we do want to pre-cook our corn a bit before we hit the grill, which is our next stop. So I'm heading out back. I'm going to place this on a hot charcoal grill. And yes, of course you could use a gas grill for this, but I really think the smokiness from the charcoal adds a lot to it. And by the way, the reason they're rolling, I had them perpendicular to the grates. Everybody knows you have to put the corn going the same direction as the grates or they will roll. So I fixed it. But bottom line, just keep turning it on the grill until it's as done as you want. Now, some people just barely want a little bit of golden brown on there. Other people like it almost completely charred. But for me, I like it somewhere in the middle, as I do with most things. All right, so I don't want it too black, but I do want some very nice caramelization. It's really going to sweeten that corn up. And of course, add that little bit of smokiness, which I think adds so much to this. So I'm going to pull that off. We're going to head back inside and onto that hot, smoky corn. We're going to brush our melted butter. And you're probably thinking, hey, I'd just eat it like that. It looks delicious. Well, you're right. But hold on. We're going to kick this up not 1, but 2 notches. All right, so after you apply the butter, I want you to take your ancho lime mayonnaise and brush it on. And not just a little. We want complete coverage. All right, so brush that on shamelessly until it's completely coated with a nice thick layer. And then, the best part, the grating of the Mexican cheese. So we're using a white cheese called cotija. And you can read about that on the blog, but it is a very mild cheese. It sort of tastes like an undersalted, slightly drier feta, which may not be the most delicious sounding description, but trust me, with this combination, it is unbelievable. So we're going to grate that over generously. If you want, you can turn those over and do the other side. Although I cheat. I eat one side and then turn it over and grate it on the other fresh. But that's up to you. And if you can't find that, you'll see that Parmesan is a very common substitute. Although if it's me, I probably would go with feta. Although that is much saltier, but Parmesan and feta will work in a pinch. Having said that, most of the big fancy supermarkets will carry cotija cheese, so check it out. And other than garnishing with a few wedges of lime, that gorgeous plate of corn is done. Look at that. You may never do grilled corn any other way. It's that delicious. The way that mild, subtly salty cheese works with that ancho lime mayonnaise, along with that buttery, smoky corn, it is just a magnificent combination of flavors. It's just one of the world's great corn recipes. And I have to say, I never film at this hour of the day because of the way the sunlight goes through our neighbor's trees, but here it kind of works. Plus, I didn't notice till I already started editing. But anyway, crazy lighting aside, this was perfect. Or as they say in Mexico, perfecto. No, I don't speak Spanish, but I am fluent in like 20 words. Perfecto being uno of them. So anyway, very simple, very easy. You can prep your mayo and corn ahead of time and then just grill and eat when you're ready. So I really, really, really hope you give this one a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Summer Vegetable Cavatelli with fresh corn cream. That's right, not only am I going to show you how to make a very simple, very delicious pasta, I'm also going to show you a possibly game-changing technique for creating a cream substitute using fresh, sweet summer corn. Although game-changing might be a little overstated, let's go with genius and revolutionary instead, all right? And to get started, of course, we're going to need a couple of ears of corn. And I'm using some white corn from Brentwood, California. And before we get started, I thought this was fascinating. Each of these ears of white corn had exactly one golden kernel. I bet that's caused by something. But anyway, what we need to do first is separate kernel from cob. And I generally like to use an extremely dangerous method where I just shave it off with a really sharp knife like this, barely avoiding cutting my knuckles. But because I got so much email the last time I did that, I thought I would show you the safer method, which is to invert a ramekin like this, and then hold the cob straight up and down like this while we slice down in a much, much safer fashion. And you can do this without the ramekin, but that holds it up a little higher, so our knife does not hit the edges of the bowl, which isn't really great for your blade. And not only do we want to slice the kernels off, but once we do, we want to use the back of the knife like this and just kind of scrape it down at an angle. And that's going to let us get the last of that sweet, milky goodness attached to the cob. So don't skip that step. That's going to give us a couple tablespoons of the best part of the corn. So we'll go ahead and we'll do 2 ears. And once those cobs have been dekerneled, let's go ahead and transfer that into a blender, to which we'll add some chicken broth or stock. And I generally like to do 1 cup of liquid per ear of corn. So I'm going to pour in 2 cups, and then we'll head over to the blender and blend this on high for a couple minutes until completely smooth. And then once that's been accomplished, we can pretty much use this as is, but because I like to add steps and wash extra dishes, I'm going to go ahead and pass mine through a fine strainer, and that's going to allow all that beautiful, sweet, creamy goodness to go through, and the only thing we're going to be left with is the toughest, most fibrous remnants. So that is an optional step, but for me, totally worth the extra couple minutes, because you do get a silkier, nicer product. And as soon as that's strained, what we're left with is what I'm calling fresh, sweet corn cream. I know, it kind of looks more like corn milk, but believe it or not, we can use this in any pasta that calls for cream, and it works pretty much just about the same. So that's done, and we'll just set that aside and move on to the actual pasta. So in a pan set over medium heat, into which I put a little bit of olive oil, I'm going to add about 3 or 4 ounces of pancetta, and we're going to cook that pretty well done, not quite crisp. And yes, you can definitely use bacon here. The only difference between pancetta and bacon is pancetta is not smoked, so it just depends on what you're going for here. But like I said, we're going to cook that on medium until pretty well done, which is going to take a few minutes. So while you're waiting for that, you can go ahead and pull the rest of your ingredients together. And thanks to a trip to Farmer's Market yesterday, I'm going to do some diced green zucchini, some red bell pepper, and some unbelievably sweet and incredibly tiny cherry tomatoes that I cut in half. And then, of course, we have our dried pasta, which, as you already heard, we're using cavatelli. And I'm not exactly sure what that means in Italian, but based on the shape, it probably is slang for, I don't know, canoe? Maybe canoe. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, while your pancetta is cooking, we can go ahead and get the rest of our ingredients together. So we'll head back over to the stove, where as you can see, our pancetta is just about perfect. But before we add our veggies, I do want to remove a little bit of this fat. And for me, the best way to do this is just with a wadded up piece of paper towel. All right, I find this very fast, very easy, and virtually mess-free. And we don't have to get all of it. We can leave a little bit in there. And then once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and add our red pepper, as well as our diced zucchini, or of course, whatever veggies you're using. We'll also want to do a big pinch of salt, and we'll give that a stir. Maybe we'll bump our heat up to medium-high, but you be the judge. And what we'll do is we'll saute that for about 3 or 4 minutes, just until that zucchini starts to soften up. Okay, we don't want it mushy. We just want to take that raw edge off, because this is going to cook for a few more minutes in the sauce. And then what we're going to do at this point is turn off the heat, and I'm going to go ahead and toss in a pinch of cayenne and a little bit of freshly ground black pepper, and we'll give that a stir. And that pan is pretty much ready for the pasta, which ideally you've timed to finish cooking right about this point, but you don't have to. That's why we just turned the heat off. All right, our pan of veggies can just sit there for 6 or 7 minutes while we wait. So as usual, we'll boil our pasta in some salted water, and I will recommend doing it like a minute under whatever the box says, because it will get cooked a little more as we finish this dish off. And once our pasta is cooked, we will add it to our pan, and make sure you're draining it pretty good. We don't want a lot of water in this. Along with about 1.5 cups of our corn cream. And we'll turn our heat back on to medium-high, and then basically all we have to do is wait for this to heat through and thicken up a little bit. And because of the starchiness in that corn, which if I'm not mistaken is very similar to cornstarch, as this comes back up to temperature and starts simmering, you're going to notice it thicken up nicely, almost as if we were reducing cream. It's going to thicken up and it should coat that pasta beautifully. So at this point we're going to turn off the heat and add the last few ingredients. So we'll toss in our sliced cherry tomatoes, as well as some fresh herb. I'm going to go with Italian parsley and basil. Then we'll also do a little grating of some real Parmesan, Parmigiano Reggiano. It's expensive, but we're only going to use about 25 cents worth. And we'll stir that all together. And that's pretty much it. Except for, of course, the most important step, taste for seasoning. So, of course, that's what I did, and ended up adding a little more salt. So be sure to check. You're the melly mel of your cavatelli. And once that is seasoned to perfection, we can plate up. So I'm going to spoon that into a pasta bowl, and quite possibly garnish with a little extra cheese, and maybe another pinch of herb. And that simple but beautiful summer vegetable cavatelli is done. And sure, you could do this exact same recipe with just regular cream, but not only does the corn work beautifully texture-wise, it also tastes like delicious sweet corn. So I really do love this technique, and in this particular dish, that sweetness really works so well because it's playing off the acidity from the tomatoes, as well as pairing perfectly with those fresh vegetables. And as far as the pancetta goes, you know what? I should have used bacon. In hindsight, that smokiness would have been perfect with this. But despite that, still very, very good. But anyway, that's it. I don't want to make too much of a simple pasta dish, but I do sort of want to make a big deal about that corn cream. So whether you're lactose intolerant, or you're just running out of things to do with fresh corn, either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Bacon. That's right, if you like bacon and you like corn, you are absolutely going to love this cheesy jalapeno and bacon spiked cream corn, which I'm officially presenting as a side dish. But truth be told, I actually ate this all by itself, and it really was magnificent, so I think next to like a salad, this would be a great main course also. And by the way, other than the bacon, this is pretty much a vegetarian dish. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by adding a half a pound of bacon to this dry skillet, which is over medium-high heat. And the first thing we're going to want to do here is cook this, stirring occasionally, until it's almost, but not quite cooked crisp. And as you'll see, most of the fat's going to render out, which we will then use to cook our other ingredients in. And if there's one thing I know about other ingredients, is that cooking them in bacon fat is almost always a great idea. So like I said, we'll go ahead and cook our bacon until almost crisp. And while we're waiting for that to happen, let's go ahead and talk corn. And this is one of those recipes that will work equally well, whether you shave these kernels off fresh corn, or just thaw and drain some frozen corn like I'm doing here. In fact, if it's early in the season, the frozen corn might actually work better since it'll be a little sweeter. But either way, we're going to need about 2 pounds. And then what we'll do once our bacon is almost but not quite crisp is go ahead and add about half of our corn in, which we will then lightly toast in this hot bacon fat. And of course, since I love to give you options, for this step you could add all the corn, or none of the corn. But I like to split the difference and toast some of it, just to provide a little extra sweetness and bring out some of those subtle caramely notes. But anyway, you decide. But personally, like I said, I like to do about half and cook it until those kernels just start to take on a little golden brown color. And then once that happens, we'll go ahead and introduce the rest of our vegetation, including a whole bunch of minced garlic, as well as some sliced green onions, mostly the light and white parts. And we can save those darker green parts to garnish later. And then for some beautiful bittersweet heat, we will toss in a couple diced jalapeno peppers and stir all this together. And then what we should do is cook this for about 3 or 4 minutes, or until those veggies start to soften and sweeten up. Oh, and you may have noticed, I didn't drain off any of that bacon fat when we cooked the bacon. Okay, I wanted to make sure we had plenty to saute all the rest of the stuff, which we definitely did, which means we can probably get rid of some of that fat now if we want. And a great trick for doing that while we're cooking with stuff still in the pan is to just sort of push everything off to one side. And then by simply taking a wadded up paper towel and some tongs, we can tilt the pan, which will have the excess oil running to that end, where it can be quickly and easily absorbed. So feel free to do that at any point during the cooking process. And then the other thing we can do while our veggies are cooking is go ahead and add our seasonings, which will include some kosher salt, some freshly ground black pepper, and of course the obligatory shakes of cayenne. And we'll go ahead and stir all that in. And we'll continue on medium-high until we think our veggies have cooked long enough, at which point we'll go ahead and introduce our heavy cream. And by the way, the recipe which inspired this actually uses mayonnaise and sweetened condensed milk instead of cream, which seemed a little overly rich for me, and what's the word I'm looking for? Insane? So it sounds kind of funny to say, but we are actually doing a lighter version by using heavy cream. But anyway, we'll go ahead and stir that in and wait for it to come to a boil. And then once that happens, we'll go ahead and dump in the rest of our corn. And we'll continue stirring and cooking until we're sure that's all heated through. And then once we're positive that's happened, what we'll do is turn off the heat and stir in a lot of cheese. And I'm going with 1 part mozzarella to 2 parts Monterey Jack. Although as usual, please use whatever cheeses you want. I mean, you are after all the Jason Bourne of this cheesy bacon corn. But the original recipe just uses mozzarella. So I thought I would semi-honor that with the addition of some Monterey Jack, which is kind of like mozzarella, only has a little more flavor. But regardless of what you use, we'll go ahead and stir that in. And then let me give you a little heads up here. One thing I learned about this recipe is that if you want the cheese all nice and stringy and stretchy, you have to brown the top and serve this immediately. Because if you wait like an hour like I did, you will not experience the same effect, as you're about to see. But anyway, whether you wait or do it right away, we're going to go ahead and finish the top with cheese before browning it. And here you can see me doing this very intricate pattern that I thought would look super cool. But as you're about to see, once it was browned, you could not tell I did this. So yes, this was a complete waste of time. But you know what? I regret nothing. I mean, come on, we got to try things, even if they don't end up working. Okay, the attempt is still heroic. So I went ahead and cheesed the top, and then finished up with one last dusting of cayenne. And that's it. Once that's set, we'll go ahead and pop that in a very hot oven, or preferably under a broiler, for about 5 to 10 minutes, or until everything is heated through, and the top is beautifully browned, and hopefully looking a little something like this, which I think looks amazing and really doesn't need a garnish. But if we have some of those green onion tops around, we might as well slice those up and throw them on. Besides, it's a proven scientific fact that eating raw onions, even a small amount, helps prevent disease. So keep that in mind if you're one of these I don't like onions people. I mean, you should still do it for your family. And that's it. Our bacon is done and ready to enjoy. Probably as a side dish. But I didn't actually have any other food to serve next to this, so I just went ahead and ate this all by itself. And it really was fantastic. Oh, and like I said, if you let this sit, that cheese loses all its stringiness. And it basically just sort of dissolves into the cream to form one of the best cheesy sauces you've ever had. And of course, all that bacon and jalapeno don't hurt. In fact, I'm going to switch to a spoon so I can get more of that stuff. And every single ingredient in this, from the cheese to the green onions to our peppers and bacon, are just absolutely perfect pairings with sweet corn. I mean, it really does not get much better than this. So basically, this is my new all-time favorite cream corn recipe. Oh, and by the way, if it's still piping hot, the texture is going to be fairly loose. But as this cools, it will thicken up, which will make this even more side dish-like. And this stuff would be perfect served room temperature at a picnic or a barbecue. But anyway, that's it. A little something we call bacon. And by we call, I mean, of course, the bun shop in LA calls it that, which is where the original recipe that inspired this is from. But anyway, clever names aside, this is a beautiful, delicious, and easy to make corn side dish that's equally amazing hot, warm, or room temp. Which is why I really do hope you give it a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Seared scallops on corn cream. That's right, corn cream, which is not to be confused with cream corn. And don't let the fact that there's only like 5 ingredients in this throw you off. This is going to come out looking and tasting like you spent all day working on it, which you didn't. I mean, come on, it's the middle of summer. Who wants to be in the kitchen all day when we could be outside playing volleyball in half shirts? Okay, so let me show you how to put this together. And to get started, we're going to go ahead and prep our corn. So I'm going to cut the kernels off 2 ears of white corn. And you'll notice I'm using the cut down into the bowl method, as opposed to the method where I'm holding it in my hand, kind of whittling it off. Apparently after our last corn video, 47 of you cut your fingers. So the legal department asked me if I could do it this way. But anyway, we're going to slice that corn off the cob into a bowl. And then once we've done that, one extra step, turn your knife and use the back to scrape down the cob, because all those extra juices running into the bowl are going to give this a little bit of extra sweetness and corny goodness. Or is it goodness and corny sweetness? But anyway, once we're done, we're going to take that corn and put it in a saucepan, to which we're going to add some butter. And I guess you vegans could use olive oil here. But if you do, I better not catch you putting scallops in this. You're going to have to take some small turnips and carve them into scallop shapes, okay? But anyway, enough with the vegan alternatives. We'll throw in some butter. We'll put that over medium-high heat. And while we wait for it to come up to temperature, we're also going to dump in some chicken broth or water. We should also probably give it a pinch of salt and the obligatory shake of cayenne. And we'll give that a stir. And all we're going to do is wait for this to come up to a simmer. We'll turn the heat down to medium-low. And we'll just let it cook for 5 minutes. That's it. So unbelievably simple. And at that point, we're going to go ahead and throw it into a blender and puree it completely smooth. But not quite yet. Let this cool down a little. You generally don't want to pour boiling hot liquids into a blender, so please let it cool down a little bit. And then, like I said, we'll process that until completely smooth, which of course has been edited for time, so let that run for a good minute or two. And then we're going to go ahead and pass that through a fine strainer. And sometimes this is optional, and this time it's not. So we're going to pour it in, we're going to use our spatula to stir it around, and at first it's going to seem like only a little bit's going through, and that you're going to be wasting a lot of corn, but you're not. Keep pressing that corn with the back of your spatula against that mesh strainer, and pretty much everything's going to pass through, except for the most fibrous and toughest bits, which is what we don't want in here. Or if you're going to call something corn cream, it's got to be very smooth and creamy. I mean, that just makes sense. And when you're done, you should have something that looks like this. In other words, gorgeous looking and luxurious feeling. And that is pretty much it for the corn component. Of course, you should taste this for salt, just as necessary. And then just keep this warm on the back of the stove until needed. And at that point, we can move on to the scallop component, which is just as simple. So I'm going to do 3 scallops per plate, and it is absolutely critical before we go any further that these have to be perfectly dry. So use some paper towels. There can be no moisture on the surface. So having these perfectly dry are one of 3 keys to getting perfectly seared scallops. And we'll move on to the second key factor. We're going to drizzle the oil over the cold scallops, not in the hot pan. So I'm going to drizzle in a couple teaspoons of vegetable oil, something high heat, canola, grapeseed, something like that. And then in addition to the oil, we're going to season this up with some salt and some smoked paprika. And that's not just in there for its great smoky, bittersweet flavor. It's also going to give these a beautiful color. And then because I had it, I'm going to throw in 1 sliced red Fresno chili. And then we'll take a spatula and mix that up very well. Make sure all that seasoning is distributed and the scallops are perfectly coated with that oil. And then we're ready to move on to the third and maybe most important key, a dangerously hot pan. So I'm going to put that on high for like 5 minutes. And when you're sure it's smoking hot, although it won't be smoking because there's no oil in it, but when you're sure it's super hot, we're going to go ahead and place those scallops in. And because the oil's on the scallop, not in the pan, those scallops are going to sear beautifully, and you're not going to have a whole pan full of smoking, burning oil. So go ahead and place in those scallops. And then once those are in, I'll also take those pepper rings and throw those in the pan and give those a little stir fry while the scallops are cooking. And then we don't really do much for a couple minutes. We just let those sear without peeking. Although, you know what? I totally peeked right here. And I'm glad I did. Check it out. Piece of pepper underneath. Seriously, if you don't believe in Murphy's Law, you've never cooked. Because that stuff happens all the time. But did it affect me? A little bit. But not too much. I just took it off and gave it a few more seconds and then started turning those over. So that one was a little messed up because of the pepper. But let me try this one. This should be better. Although, you know what? I put that one down on its side. So I guess I'm 0 for 2. Let's try another one. All right, it's getting better. So we'll flip those over. And if you're thinking, do we really need to go through all that trouble for just a little bit of browning on the edges? Yes. Huge, huge difference in flavor. Trust me. And while I'm waiting for mine to finish up, I'm going to go ahead and remove my red peppers from the pan and reserve those. Don't lose those. We're going to use them in a minute. So we're going to continue to let those cook. I'm going to guess and say it's about 3 minutes per side. But just a pure guess. If they feel mushy, they're raw. If they feel hard, they're overcooked. So you really need to try to get somewhere in between. Basically, when they spring back to the touch, almost like a chicken breast, that should be pretty close. And right about here, I decided mine were done. So I'm going to remove those scallops to a warm plate. I'm going to turn off the heat. And then I decided to do one very fast, very optional step. I threw in a splash of water, and even though that pan's off, it still has a tremendous amount of residual heat. So I threw in a splash of water to deglaze, along with another little piece of butter, and then my peppers. And what I basically want to do is kind of glaze those peppers in those sweet, caramely, scallopy pan drippings. So we're not really making a sauce here. We're just kind of upgrading our pepper rings. And then last but not least, I squeezed in a little bit of lemon. And even though it looks kind of juicy, that pan was so hot, by the time I served this up, all that liquid was gone. And my pepper rings were beautifully glazed, as you're going to see right now as we plate up. So for final assembly, we're going to grab a warm bowl. We're going to ladle in some of that beautiful corn cream, also known as corn puree, which I don't think is nearly as poetic. And then over that, we'll place our 3 perfectly seared scallops. Just a beautiful sight. And then, of course, I'll scatter over a few of those red pepper rings, which, as you just saw, were kind of glazed with those pan drippings, butter, and a little bit of lemon. And then I was going to finish this with some fresh chive, but then I remembered I had some radish sprouts, so I used those, which not only look nice, but really work with the flavors here. And those seared scallops on corn cream are done. So summery, so inviting. So let me dig in here. I think this is a spoon dish. And that combination of that luxurious, perfectly smooth, perfectly creamy corn mixture with those meaty seared scallops, which naturally have a sweet flavor, which was significantly accentuated by the searing step. And then as a visual and taste contrast, we have those peppers, adding some heat, adding some texture. That is just a beautiful bowl of summer, all right? So when I think of seasonal cooking this time of year, this is exactly the kind of thing I'm picturing. Simple, easy, and pairs beautifully with ice cold beer. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Crispy Fresh Corn Fritters. That's right, when it comes to eating fresh sweet corn, I think pretty much everyone's in agreement that the best way is right off the cob. But when it comes to the second best way, that's where we're going to get some arguments. And while these aren't really the kind of arguments you can win or lose, they're still fun to have. Especially when you're arguing for a recipe like this, which happens to be beautiful, easy, delicious, and, as you'll see, a little bit dangerous. But we'll get to that. For now, let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to need to do is find some beautiful, fresh sweet corn. And I'm lucky enough to be using the famous white corn from Brentwood, California, which really is amazing. And what it lacks in yellow color, it more than makes up for in incredible sweetness. And will I be mad if you don't use fresh corn? Well, I won't be mad, but I will be disappointed. And by the way, if you're not sure how to get the corn off the cob, I'm going to put a link in the blog post to a video to show you how to do that. And then besides finding some fresh corn, the other thing we're going to want to do ahead of time is make our sauce, which has a grand total of 3 ingredients, including some mayonnaise that we're going to spike with lots of chipotle pepper, which, as you may know, is a smoked jalapeno, so it is a little bit spicy. And then we'll finish this off with some freshly squeezed lime juice. And that's it. We will stir that together and simply refrigerate that until needed. And obviously, with any kind of sauces like this, the pepper and lime are to taste. Okay, so taste and adjust. You are, after all, the babysitters of how to sauce your crispy fresh corn fritters. So just because I call for 2 teaspoons of chipotle, don't assume that's how much you're going to put in. But regardless of amounts, we'll go ahead and mix that up, at which point we can move into final production, which is going to involve making a ridiculously simple batter that'll start with the white from 1 large egg, to which we're going to add some ice water, or just very, very cold water. Not to be confused with Berry Berry Gold Water. Not sure why I thought of that name. And then we'll also go ahead and toss in a pinch of salt before grabbing a whisk and beating this mixture until it's nice and foamy. And I realize some people get nervous when they see something that looks like a meringue, but relax. Unlike some batters that include egg whites, this one requires no finesse and no gentle folding or anything like that. Because once we've whipped our mixture for a minute or two, and it looks like this, what we're going to do is whisk in some cornstarch and self-rising flour. And we're going to keep whisking until we have what looks like a very thin pancake batter. Oh, and do me a favor. Please ignore all the lumps you see when I first start whisking this. You're probably not going to have those because you're not going to dump in your cornstarch and flour and then wait 2 minutes while you change your camera position and then start whisking. But I'm actually kind of glad you saw that because it reinforces the point this is not a very temperamental batter. Just whisk it together with complete disregard for preserving any of those egg white bubbles. Because we're still going to have millions of microscopic bubbles. Plus, we have that baking powder in the self-rising flour, which, as usual, I'll tell you how to make your own on the blog post. And then once our batter's mixed, we have one step left, and that's to introduce our fresh corn. And the reason you see me not adding it all at once is because I kind of want to judge by eye the proper ratio between the corn and the batter. So even though I took the kernels off 2 cobs of corn, depending on the size, maybe that would be too much for this batter. But having said that, it wasn't, and I ended up using it all. But the point is, regardless of the amounts I give, as far as a ratio between corn and batter goes, this is what we want it to look like. And then once that's set, we can go ahead and fry these up in about a 1/2 inch of vegetable oil that we've heated to 350 degrees. And we're going to cook these for about 2 minutes per side or until browned and crispy. And since I'm home alone, I'm just going to make one for now, for demo purposes. But feel free to do as many as you can fit in the pan without crowding. And then let me drop a little fun fact about fresh corn on you. Roughly 1 out of every 300 or 400 kernels of corn will explode during this process. Which is why if you have one, I highly recommend using one of these splatter guards. And as you could probably tell from the appearance, I've had this one for about 20 years. So one of these screens is not a bad idea, and I'll quickly let you see and hear why. Which reminds me, something that covers your eyes is not a bad idea either. So be very careful, and if you have kids in the kitchen, maybe try to talk them into doing this step. And the other safety tip here is when you flip this, make sure you use 2 utensils. That way you're much less likely to splash the oil. Although, of course, I looked at the viewfinder and took my eye off the pan and totally splashed mine anyway. But still good advice. So I went ahead and cooked that for 2 minutes per side, or until browned and crispy, at which point we'll remove that to a paper towel to drain for a few seconds. And if everything's gone according to plan, it should look something like this. So these should cook till they're nicely browned and crispy, which is hard to tell just by looking. So let me grab a fork for auditory verification. Oh yeah, that sounds good. And I really do need to try this little piece. Except I sort of messed up my shape. But that's okay. We can rebuild it. We have the technology. That was just me being the $6 million man of having a plan. And then feel free to enjoy these as is. They are fantastic. But I'm going to elevate mine, as the fancy foodies like to say, by topping it with some fresh Dungeness crab. And then we'll go ahead and finish up with our spicy, tangy sauce. As well as I'll redden up that crab with a little extra cayenne. And then I finished up with some strategically placed slices of green onion. And then last but not least, maybe a little wedge of lime, Just make sure you cut it small and sexy like I did. And that's it. Our crispy fresh corn fritter with crab is done. And the first time I made this, I was really hoping it tasted as good as it looked. And it did. Maybe better. And for me, what makes this so enjoyable is the amount of corn. If you were hoping this is one of the fritters that's almost all dough with just a few specks of corn, you're not going to enjoy this. I mean, this thing is pretty much all corn. And the batter here is really more of a crispy glue to hold everything together. It really is quite extraordinary. And that's not even taking into consideration the crab, which really amplifies all this deliciousness. And hopefully now you'll see why in the intro I said this is probably my second favorite way to eat fresh corn. So I really do love everything about this. And I'm not exactly sure when it's going to happen this summer, but at some point you're going to run out of things to do with fresh corn. And when that happens, I really do hope you remember this video so you can give this a try. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Just corn soup. That's right, I know it doesn't look like much, but that's only because it's not much. As the recipe name would indicate, it's basically just corn. But with this lax in ingredients, it more than makes up for it by being probably the greatest hot summer soup ever. And since there's hardly anything to it, it's very simple to make. So let's go ahead and get started. And for our first step here, we're going to have to remove the corn from some cobs. 3 to be exact. And the last time I showed this, I got in trouble because I did it this way. Which is how a lot of cooks do it because we have sharp knives, not to mention mad skills. But it really is not that safe and you can easily cut yourself. So let me show you a better, probably safer method. If we place a ramekin upside down in the bottom of the bowl like this, we can actually use that to rest the bottom of the ear corn on, and then we can simply go around cutting straight down like this. So while not as dangerous and exciting as the other method, it does work very well and your chances of getting cut are less. And don't forget when you finish, you want to scrape that cob with the back of the knife so we get all that beautiful starchy, milky corn liquid, whatever that's called. Corn milk? Let's go with corn milk. That sounds about right. But anyway, I'm going to continue on slicing the corn off 3 cobs. And again, like I said, when you're done with a cob, make sure you take the back of a knife and sort of hold it at an angle as you scrape down. And all that beautiful, what we're calling corn milk, will go into the bowl. And then once that's set, what I like to do is kind of break it up with my hand. I'm not exactly sure why, but it does feel good. Plus, if you've missed any of those corn silks, they usually stick to your hand or the edge of the bowl. So we'll give that a quick check to make sure there's nothing in there besides kernels of corn. At which point we're going to divide this up. I'm going to go ahead and add half to my saucepan. And I'm going to put the other half in a blender. Oops, a couple kernels tried to escape. Don't worry, those won't get far. And then to the corn in the blender, we're also going to add some nice fresh cold water. At which point we will take that over and puree it very, very, very fine. In fact, I'm using this setting called liquefy. So we'll go ahead and blend that on whatever your high setting is for a minute or two until it's completely smooth. At which point we can pour that right back into our saucepan containing the whole corn. And then once that's set, we'll head over to the stove and we will place that down on medium-high heat and bring that up to a simmer. And of course we will do final seasoning at the end. But I know I'm going to need some salt, so I'll add some here, as well as a shake of cayenne, just to stay in shape. And we will stir that in. And like I said, we're going to bring this up to a simmer on medium-high. And then once that happens, what we'll do is we'll give it a stir, and we will back our heat down to medium-low, and we will let this cook for about 30 minutes or so. And what's going to happen during that time, it's going to go from something that looks sort of milky and creamy to something kind of watery and grainy and separated looking. All right, definitely not a super appetizing appearance. But don't worry, we have one more step, which is the last step, which is going to make everything better. And by better, I mean butter. Because what we're going to do is reduce our heat down to the lowest setting and toss in 2 tablespoons of cold unsalted butter. And then what we're going to do is emulsify this in by using our stick blender. But I'm not going to puree this all the way smooth. I'm just going to pulse on and off, and then just maybe let it run for a few seconds until 2 things happen. Our butter emulsifies in beautifully, and the soup turns into something that looks nice and creamy again. So this right here is perfect for me. And by the way, in case you're wondering, and you really should be, why we blended some of the corn at the beginning, if we were going to blend it at the end anyway? Well, that is a good question, and one I will answer in excruciating detail on the blog post. But anyway, we will blend that to our desired texture, and other than checking the seasoning here, we're pretty much done. So we'll go ahead and grab a spoon and give this a taste. And while magnificent, I decide mine needed a little touch of salt, as well as another pinch of cayenne. And that's it. As soon as we're happy with how this tastes, our just corn soup is done. So let's go ahead and serve that up into some hot bowls or cups. And in keeping with that just corn soup theme, we'll garnish this with nothing. Just a little more soup. In fact, the only thing we need here to accessorize this would be a spoon. And that, my friends, while incredibly simple and primitive, is just extraordinarily delicious. I mean, have you ever been eating corn on the cob and thought to yourself, this is amazing, but I wish it wasn't on a cob and I didn't have to chew it? That is pretty much what we have right here. I mean, people love to throw out that term, less is more, which is almost never true. Would you rather find a $100 bill or a $10 bill? There's just one example. But when it comes to a soup like this, totally accurate. Less is actually more. But of course, having said that, some of you may be thinking to yourselves, hey, I'm the Jason Bourne of my liquid corn. What if, for the sake of argument, I wanted to add a little bit of creme fraiche to the top, along with possibly some crumbled bacon, as well as some green onions, and maybe, just maybe, a little shake of cayenne? That would be delicious also, yes? Yes, it would. So while I do hope you make and taste this in its pure form, please, as usual, feel free to trick this out any way you see fit. But either way, whether you're going to enjoy this as is, or top with your favorite fixins, I really do hope you give it a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Corn pudding. That's right, every year about this time I try to post one side dish recipe for people that need something to bring to that family holiday gathering, but don't know how to cook, don't have a lot of money, and also probably tired. And if you're all or any of those things, this should really work out well for you, as it is incredibly delicious, very easy, and relatively inexpensive to make. And one of the big reasons for that is because we're going to use frozen corn, which, as you know, requires no prep, other than letting it thaw and drain thoroughly. So what you see here is 2 1-pound bags of frozen corn. And by the way, when you go to buy your corn, there's going to be 2 different brands in the frozen case, and the bags are going to look the same, but one's going to be $1 more than the other. And I highly recommend you buy the one that's more expensive, as the quality and sweetness will be superior. But either way, once our corn is thawed and drained, we're going to need to transfer it into a blender or food processor, where we're going to puree it with the other ingredients, or at least most of them. And how much of the corn we blend smooth can range from 0% to 100%. All right, that all depends on if you want whole corn in your pudding and exactly how much. And over the years, I've tried every different possible ratio, from using all the kernels whole to the version we're doing today where we puree it all, which is my preferred style. And I'm going to talk more about that on the blog, but basically that's going to be up to you, since you are, after all, the kernel of your corn. But anyway, like I said, I'm going to go with the fully smooth version, so I'm going to transfer all my corn in. And then to that, we'll add a few tablespoons of maple syrup, just to turn up that sweetness a touch. And usually it is white sugar called for here, but I do prefer the flavor of the maple. Plus, it always seems a little more holiday-ish. But anyway, we'll do a little bit of maple syrup, followed by 6 whole large eggs. Oh, and by the way, if we separated those eggs and whipped the whites and added them at the end, this exact same recipe would be called corn souffle, which is a lot more work, but comes out pretty much exactly the same. So personally, I do prefer the pudding. But anyway, let's continue on with a nice big splash of milk, followed by what looks like too much salt. Okay, we're going to need 3 teaspoons of kosher salt, which, by the way, is only like 1.5 teaspoons of fine table salt. But as I've explained before, because kosher salt has such a large crystal, it looks like you're putting a crazy amount in, but you're not. You're putting the right amount in. And then speaking of right, it would be totally wrong not to put some cayenne in. So let's add about 1/4 teaspoon of that, followed by our last 2 ingredients, some all-purpose flour and some baking powder. No, not soda, baking powder. And as usual, please check and make sure it's from this decade. And then what I like to do at this point is take a spatula and give this a little mix before we blend it. Which seems kind of weird because we're going to blend it. But I'm always worried if I don't, when I first turn on the blender, all that baking powder will fly up and stick to the top of the lid, and it will lead to some kind of major situation. And why didn't I simply just add the baking powder earlier and top it with other ingredients? That is such a great question. Anyway, moving on. Once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and blend this completely smooth. And as you know, I'm kind of a paranoid blender, so I always like to start off kind of slow, maybe pulse it on and off a few times to get it started. And then once I'm feeling pretty good about how it's going, we'll crank that up a bit and blend it on high until completely smooth, or at least as smooth as corn will get in a blender. And then what we'll do once that's been properly pureed is transfer it into a mixing bowl, where we'll go ahead and add the last 2 ingredients. The first of which would be some melted butter. And what I have here is 1 stick melted, but we're not going to add it all. what we'll do is add about 2/3, and then save 1/3 to grease our baking dish. And then last but not least, we'll finish this up by adding our heavy cream, and we will grab a whisk and mix that until thoroughly combined. And if you're wondering why we're stirring this in now and didn't add it to the blender, well, for a few reasons. We generally don't want to overfill our blenders, and I'm always hesitant to blend cream because once overmixed, it can separate and turn into butter. So I prefer to add these 2 ingredients at the end. But anyway, like I said, we'll stir that until completely combined, at which point it's ready to transfer into our baking dish, which, as you can see, I've greased with the rest of the butter. And what I like to do is set that baking dish on a baking sheet that I've lined with a Silpat. And I'll go into detail on the blog, but that's basically to insulate the dish a little bit, so the heat's absorbed a little more gently than if we just put that dish in with no pan. And it's been my experience that for things bound with eggs, gentle is generally a good thing. And then once our dish is prepped, we'll go ahead and transfer our batter in, at which point we are pretty much ready to bake. Although, you know what, for old time's sake, let's go ahead and give it the old tappa. And that's just to bring up any air bubbles to the surface, because if you didn't, those would have caused absolutely no problems. And then once that's set, we can go ahead and transfer that into the center of a 350-degree oven for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, or until beautifully browned and set, and also incredibly gorgeous. So this is what mine looked like after an hour and 15 minutes. And other than the appearance, there's 2 ways you can check to see this is cooked enough. Okay, if we give the dish a little jiggle, you will see a little bit of a wiggle, but it won't look like there's liquid under the surface. So that's looking perfect. And then the other way you can check if you want is with a toothpick or a skewer, which should come out relatively clean. Okay, if there's a bunch of raw batter stuck to that, put it back in, give it a few more minutes. But assuming it's cooked long enough, which mine did, we are pretty much ready to serve. Although I do like to let it cool down a little. I mean, piping hot's fine. But for me personally, the maximum flavor is perceived between warm and hot. Of course, having said that, this looked and smelled so incredible, I basically served it up immediately. And that, my friends, is one of the all-time great side dishes, holiday or otherwise. And while the taste and appearance are sure to dazzle, I think what's most impressive about this is the texture. It is so incredibly light and soft, you're going to be confused at how it's even holding its shape. It's just incredible. And I can't wait to get into this, but I had to. As a registered food blogger, I had to do the mandatory and gratuitous overhead, portion on the plate, portion missing from the pan shot. All right, that's enough. Let's eat. And notwithstanding the Cob, I cannot imagine a better delivery system for corn than this dish. It has such a deep, profound, corny flavor. It really is spectacular. It's one of those rare side dishes that's rich and decadent, yet light and airy at the same time. It really is hard to exaggerate how good this is. And believe me, I'm trying. But anyway, that's it, my take on corn pudding. So whether you're looking for a very memorable side dish to share at your upcoming holiday gathering, or you're just into really delicious things to eat, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Quick creamed curried corn. That's right. Why the heck am I showing you another corn recipe right after I showed you a corn recipe? Because of this. So we're going to go ahead and add our bowl corn to our pan corn, along with a little bit of olive oil and a big pinch of salt. And I'm going to put that on medium heat and cook it until it's kind of steamy and wet. And what we're making here is a very rich and delicious creamed corn without any cream or butter. I know it sounds impossible, but you're going to be amazed. All right, so we're going to saute that corn in the olive oil for about 3 minutes, at which point we're going to add a little bit of minced garlic. All right, we'll stir that in, and we'll give that about a 1-minute saute. And then because I'm calling this curried, I'm going to go ahead and spice this up a little bit with some cayenne, some smoked paprika, and some garam masala, which is a beautiful, sweet, and aromatic Indian spice blend. And a little bit goes a long way. This corn is so naturally, awesomely delicious. Do not overspice it. So we're going to stir in those spices, and we're going to continue sauteing for about 2 more minutes, at which point the corn should be pretty much done. All right, fresh corn like this cooks really fast. We're just taking the raw edge off. So we'll cook that for a few minutes, at which point we're going to turn the heat down to low and add the magic ingredient, a scoop of plain Greek yogurt. The more I use it, the more I realize what a magical ingredient it is. So we're going to stir that in, and you're going to be so shocked that without butter, that without heavy cream, you're going to have a delicious corn side dish that's every bit as rich and decadent, and yet is significantly lower cal. I know that's usually not my thing, but this time it was, and it was incredible. And once that's mixed in, let's go ahead and turn off the heat, stir in a little bit of fresh chive, And once you've tasted for seasoning, don't be afraid to give it another pinch of salt. And once you're happy with it, that's it. Spoon it up. Your quick, creamed, curried corn is done. And as I was making this, I was thinking, this is going to taste really good. But I was not prepared for just how good. The combination of that sweet corn with that creamy, tangy yogurt, that little bit of heat from the cayenne, those aromatic Indian spices, it just was incredibly tasty. And the starch from the corn actually kind of melded with the yogurt. So not only was it creamy, it actually had a little bit of stickiness to it, which I found extremely pleasurable. All right, so like I said, this really was a demo to show you that alternative, much safer method for cutting the corn. But I figured while I had the fresh corn around, why not show you my new favorite corn side dish? So I did. So I really do hope you give that a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Creole crab and corn chowder. That's right, Mardi Gras is just around the corner, so I thought to help celebrate, why don't I do some kind of New Orleans inspired soup? Now, of course, I have no idea if they eat anything like this in New Orleans, but it does use ingredients they seem to enjoy. Corn, crab, and this, the old holy trinity, onions, peppers, and celery. And by the way, I'm using all jalapeno, but you can use any combination of mild or hot green peppers. All right, so we're going to dump the old holy trinity of aromatic vegetables into our pot with some melted butter. I'm also going to add a nice pinch of salt, and we're going to sweat that over medium heat for about 6-7 minutes until the vegetables kind of soften and the onions start to turn translucent. Now, if you like a little sweeter profile, you could go golden brown on these. If you tend to like things a little more savory, all right, you probably want to stop right here. But as they say in New Orleans, you are the boss of your trinity. Only they say it in French, and it sounds so much cooler. All right, so once our vegetables are done, we're going to spice it up a little bit. I'm going to add some Old Bay and some cayenne pepper. By the way, as I've warned you before, please do not use middle-aged bay. All right, once that's mixed in, I'm going to add a rounded tablespoon of flour to form a little bit of a roux. And this is going to thicken the chowder just a little bit extra. It's going to be pretty thick just from the corn and the crab, but this is going to give it a little extra body. And if there's one thing they love in New Orleans, it's extra body. All right, so we've cooked our flour for about 2 minutes on medium. At that point, we're going to stir in some cold water. Now, water does work, but if you happen to have some fish stock or shellfish stock, vegetable broth, even chicken broth, you could also use that for a little extra flavor. But you probably already knew that. All right, we're also going to add half our corn kernels. What about the other half? Ooh, stay tuned. You're going to see. Of course, if you can swing it, use fresh, sweet summer corn, freshly shucked. If not, and you're in the middle of winter like we are, use a really nice, organic, frozen sweet corn. It'll be fine, trust me. All right, and then 2 ounces of the crab, which is going to be about 1/4 of our crab. I like to cook a little bit into the soup at this point. I think it gives it a little bit of a stronger flavor, but I do like to put most of it in fresh at the end. All right, so the corn's in, the crab is in. All right, we're going to raise the heat up to medium-high, and we're going to bring this up to a simmer. Now, while we're waiting, we're going to put the other half of the corn in a blender with a little bit of water and some garlic. And that was only a couple cloves of garlic. It looked like a lot because they, kind of broke when I crushed them. We're going to puree that mixture, and we're going to go ahead and pour that into the soup pot. So we'll stir that in, and we're going to wait for this to come up to a simmer. So we're going to keep an eye on it. When you see it start to simmer, you're going to go ahead and give it a stir, back the heat down to low, and let this simmer for about 35-40 minutes. All right, just on low. It's going to reduce a little bit. The color's going to deepen a little bit. It's going to definitely thicken up, and it will look something like that. All right, so we're ready to finish this off. And we're going to do that with a big spoon of sweet paprika, not smoked, not spicy, just regular, high-quality Spanish paprika, a nice big splash of cream, and the rest of our fresh crab, that's another 6 ounces. So I had a 1/2 pound total. As you saw, we put in 2 ounces at the beginning. So we're going to stir all that in, and we're getting close to being done. And regarding the paprika, not only is that going to give some flavor, but corn chowder is not the most beautiful soup in the world. It has that kind of pale yellow color. So I kind of like what the paprika does to the color. Kind of gives it a little bit of an orange blush. And as soon as that crab is heated through and you've tasted and adjusted the seasoning, you are ready to eat your Creole crab and corn chowder. Ladle this up into a bowl, top with some fancy cut green onions. I could have just sliced them, but I wanted to assert my culinary dominance. little pinch of cayenne just to stay in shape, and there you go. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Mardi Gras, you would not believe what I had to do to get those beads. And yes, it looks very rustic, and rustic is what we chefs call things that are, kind of ugly but really super delicious. And it really is. That sweet crab, that sweet corn, the aromatic vegetables, the spice from the cayenne and the Old Bay. Just a really, really nice chowder, and certainly something that would hit the spot on a chilly winter night. And like I said, if it's the middle of summer, of course use the fresh corn. Anyway, I hope you give that a try. All the ingredients are on foodwishes.com along with more information, as usual. And as always, enjoy.